LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, Cross Question, with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:03 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. On the panel tonight, we have Baroness Arlene Foster, Chair of Intertrade UK, which promotes trade across the UK, and also a non-affiliated peer, and of course, as you will remember, former Northern Ireland First Minister. Dr. Peter Prinsley is Labour MP for Bury St Edmonds and Stowmarket, and he retired this month from a 4-decade-long career as an NHS surgeon. Stephen Gethins, you may remember, has been on this programme many times, but not in recent years, because he lost his seat back in, 2019, but he's back as SNP MP for Arbroath and Broughty, Ferry. Samantha Smith is a journalist and commentator. She'll be joining us momentarily, and we want your questions. 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, and of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from David, who says, should MPs decide who should and shouldn't play at music festivals? Now, I wonder how many of you are familiar with this story. Now, this is in response to the row about the video, which appears to show a member of Irish rap group Kneecap urging people to kill their local MP. The Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, has today urged the organisers of the Glastonbury Festival to think very carefully about who is invited to perform there this year, while Conservative Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois said that the group should surely be barred today from the Glastonbury lineup. Well, I think I'm right in saying that an event at the Eden Project, they have decided to disinvite or uninvite, I'm not sure which is the right word, Kneecap from appearing there. Now, let's go to Stephen Gethins first. Stephen, what do you think about this? Because I've seen all of the press reports, and it's very lurid language that they use, but people who say, well, free speech is absolute, will say they have every right to say whatever they want.
But I'm not sure free speech is absolute. I mean, we have, and I'm not saying this applies here, but we have hate crime legislation, we have laws of tort in Scotland and libel elsewhere. And I have to say, I think the Scotland's First Minister, John Swinney, was right to call out some of this language. We will all disagree with each other from time to time, and I suspect Arlene and I will disagree ferociously over issues. But I think we have to be really careful. 2 MPs have been murdered in recent years. We've seen threats. So, I think people should be politically active. I think they should have a view. I don't think musicians should be stopped from having their views. And there'll be issues that they can feel very strongly about, such as the issue of what's going on in the conflict between Israel and Palestine, what's going on in Gaza. I feel very strongly about that. But I think we all need to be careful in terms of how we conduct ourselves in a democratic society. It comes with rights, lots of rights, but also comes with responsibilities and how we conduct our debates and discussions.
Arlene Foster, I think you have fallen victim to this group.
Yes, I live rent-free in this group's head. I'm in some of their lyrics. I have appeared on some of their posters, advertising some of their concerts, strapped to a rocket going off into the air. So this group is vehemently anti-British. They hate the British. They make no secret about that. I think
they are from Northern Ireland.
They're from Northern Ireland. They're from West Belfast. The point is, though, as Stephen has rightly said, of course people have a right to free speech. People have a right to say nasty things. There's not a law against offending people, and my goodness, they've offended a lot of people in their time. But they've overstepped the mark, Iain, that's the point. They've gone into terrorism act positions insofar as they've breached, and as we know, the counter-terrorism police are looking into this at the moment in relation to alleged support for Hamas, alleged support for Hezbollah. They make
Which
it very...
They're now denying.
it's taken out of context, apparently. I'm not sure there is a context where you could... Well, they've been pictured reading books from Nasrallah and been very open about their support, as they are for their support for the IRA. And I thought it was very telling that when they put out their very limited apology, which they put out late last night, that it was two very specific MPs' families that they apologised for causing the hurt to. They didn't apologise for causing hurt to MPs who'd been murdered by the IRA. There was no mention of Erin Eve's family. There was no mention of Robert Bradford's family. You know what I mean? So they're very specific in who they apologise to. And for many years now, they have been very much pro-Republican terrorism. They dress up as DJ Provo. They call themselves Kneecap, which of course is a paramilitary style of control of young people that has been used right across Northern Ireland, but most specifically in urban areas of Belfast. So they make no secret of that. So the point is they have overstepped the mark, and therefore I think it's perfectly legitimate for MPs who are representatives in the House of Commons to say to promoters of music festival, be very careful that these people are inciting young people in a particular way.
Peter Prinsley.
Well, I was in the House of Commons chamber yesterday when Mark Francois raised a point of order about this group Kneecap, and that was the first I'd heard of it. But the House fell completely silent as he described exactly what this band were about. And he pointed to the crests behind him of David Amess and opposite him of Joe Cox. And, you know, the murder of MPs in contemporary British politics is a reality. And I am sure that he's right, that something must be done to do something about this band. I certainly don't think they should be playing at major music festivals. I don't know what the rules are about stopping bands doing this and that, but this seems to me to be something which should certainly be stopped.
Now, Samantha Smith, you are the youngest person on this panel. I think.
Oh, really?
I think do you think your generation has a different view of this sort of thing?
Well, I think that Arlene is absolutely correct in that, yes, it is not illegal to be subversive or to be edgy or to make radical political statements. But the reality is that there is a difference between an edgy statement and incitement to violence. Sure. And they have, again, as Arlene rightly said, crossed the line into that. And all it takes is for one fan to worship their favourite band enough to act on those instructions that were given by Kneecap at their concert and to lead to an event like the assassination of Sir David Amess, or indeed many of the deaths and in firebomb attacks and attempted murders and successful murders of other sitting MPs by the IRA. I remember sitting on your panel with Sir David Amess at the Conservative Party conference just a few months before he was murdered, and the idea that a band that commands such a powerful and vocal presence that has positioned themselves very much in the political sphere can claim that it's an artistic expression or that they had no real motivation or active thought behind what they said, that just doesn't match up to the reality of sitting across from a man who is doing his public duty on a political panel, and then a few months later him being murdered in cold blood in a constituency hall. The reality is that British MPs are some of the most available and most vulnerable in modern political society. They don't have the legions of security guards that congressmen have, or that senators have, or that prime ministers indeed have. They are susceptible to just one crazed fan at a constituency hall who could take Kneecap's word seriously and act on the violent statements that they incited.
I mean, Peter, you're a new MP.
Yes.
Do you feel safe as you go about your business?
I do feel safe. I've been impressed by the security arrangements which have been made for us, actually. I think this is something that the parliamentary team and the Speaker's office take incredibly seriously. And early in our induction, we were introduced to our security teams. There are police officers who have a particular interest in our constituency, and there are specific security measures around us when we appear in public. which I think must all be the result of these assassinations of MPs in the last Parliament.
And there has been, I have to say, somebody coming back, as you mentioned, Iain, there has been a distinctive improvement, it has to say. I think people do take it seriously. I think the point that you're raising about the availability is so important. We all want to be as available as we possibly can be, but I think when we discuss this is not just about MPs. We've got colleagues who are staff members and who do much more of the face-to-face, who are in the office all the time if we're travelling to London. And actually what we've seen in recent terms is we have as much a responsibility as employers to those who are working who are working for us. To try and that's safe.
I was just going to say, I used to work for an MP during COVID. I worked for about 2 years before going to university, and I was in the constituency office and the Westminster office, and there were distinct times that I remember that we would have to lower the they were essentially the closest thing that you could get to bulletproof blinds in our constituency office and not open the windows for weeks on end, because when something was going on in Parliament, the local constituency offices were the first target. And for MPs and their staff members, yes, in Parliament there's excellent security detail, but when you're going around your local constituency, it's a completely different matter.
Locally, it's pivotal, actually.
Because Arlene, when you were leading the DUP and you were DRP,
new party for me.
And you were First Minister.
Yeah.
I mean, security was presumably constantly in the upper bit of your mind because you were experiencing it the whole time.
Well, I think if you come from Northern Ireland, and I grew up surrounded by security because my father was a police officer who was targeted by the IRA and survived an attempted murder attack at our home. So you're constantly aware of your own security. I think if you come from Northern Ireland and you become involved in public life, I think that has become even more targeted against young women now, particularly because of the online abuse. And I think that obviously more women are abused online than men. I think most of us understand that. And it's very difficult to get women to step forward into public life now because I've had this said to me when I was trying to encourage some young women to get involved in council level work. They said, no, we couldn't put ourselves through that. We couldn't put our family through that. I think that's wrong for democracy, and we have to have people willing to come forward. And I would always encourage people to get involved in public life. It's a great honour, it's a great privilege, and it's so enjoyable. Yes, it has its challenges, don't get me wrong, but it's wrong that young women feel now maybe we shouldn't do this to our family and to ourselves.
I think the odd thing about this whole situation with Kneecap is that, I mean, I don't know how old they are, but I've seen a picture of them. They look as if they were probably born after the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And you think, well, why do you have this hatred now? I could possibly understand it if it was at the height of the Troubles.
Well, the fact of the matter is one of their members is a 36-year-old former teacher. And you have to say to yourself, what is going on here?
Hope, really, thank God he's a former teacher.
I mean, the point of it is this. If we want to move forward in Northern Ireland, it's about reconciliation. Now, reconciliation is not rejecting who I am or who my opponent is. But it's about trying to understand where your opponent's coming from, have conversations. Stephen, right? I don't agree with him in terms of his constitutional views on the United Kingdom. That doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation and be open about those views. I think there needs to be more of a focus on reconciliation, particularly in Northern Ireland, and not a bitterness and more division and more hate being put forward.
And on the point that Arlene makes there, I'm going to agree with you about something, which is, let's talk even from a political perspective. We're talking about some really serious issues in terms of the conflict in Israel and Palestine. I want that to be dealt with in the seriousness of tens of thousands of people losing their lives, the terror attacks that happened on October 7th. You need to be effective. You need calm heads and to talk about that effective. You owe that to people to talk about it in that way. And on the point of the Constitution, I take some pride in the fact that we should debate and discuss what are very passionate issues. We can passionately disagree, and they relate to identity for some people, relate to other issues. But I think if you do not deal with these issues with respect, then selfishly you do not progress your own perspective. But that's sorry. Just
speaking from the standpoint of a young woman, it is absolutely correct that many of these, I suppose, microcosmic issues are are very complex and need to be dealt with in a very nuanced manner. But to bring it back to kneecap, as a young woman myself in my very early 20s, I can say that the followers of kneecap, those who are of that generation and of my generation, are some of simultaneously the least educated and most hyper-radicalised when it comes to socially political issues. They receive the sound bites from social media, and they follow the Instagram infographic accounts that tell them this is what's going on, this is what you should believe, and this is what you should do about it. But the nuance and the complexity of it is entirely lost. And so some of the most hyper-radicalised and politically aware, quote unquote, people I know are people who are 16, 17, 20, 21 years old. And yet they are the ones that the moment you delve below the radicalised issues, the hyper, sensationalised rhetoric that they've been taught to parrot by indeed people like this band, they have very little conception of what's actually going on in it.
We'll keep your questions coming. We'll move on to another subject in just a couple of minutes. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
19 minutes past 8 on LBC. Baroness Arlene Foster is with us. Baroness, did you ever think, growing up in Belfast, that you would end up as a baroness?
Well, I didn't grow up in Belfast. I grew up in a very rural part of Northern Ireland called County Fermanagh, so I definitely didn't think I'd be coming all across here as a baroness, let alone a dame.
Well, indeed. Yeah, see, exactly. I still think of you as dame, but you can't be Dame Baroness, can you? So, and what's your? I mean, you've been there a few months now. What's your initial impressions?
No, I've been there since November 22.
Was it? Oh, right.
Yeah, so I've been there for over 2 years. Do you know what? I really do think that the work of the House of Lords, and I would say this, wouldn't I, is underestimated because we do a lot of detailed scrutiny. So today we're doing the Employment Rights Bill, and you want to hear some of the debate over there today. It's really very detailed. You know, the head of Next, Lord Wolfson, is there giving his views on part-time workers. You know, it's really all very informed pieces of information coming forward.
Stephen Gethins, you are a retread. You were first MP for North East Fife. Yeah. You lost your seat in 2019. You won again in 2024, but this time for Arbroath and Broughty Ferry. How far is that from your original seat?
Next door. I come from north of the Tay, for those who are aware of Scottish geography.
What differences, apart from the security issue, what differences have you noticed coming back?
Well, I mean, I was here when we had periods of governments with very slim majorities and sort of general elections seemed to be every 2 minutes. It makes a difference. We're obviously a smaller group. That's politics. So it's we have to think about what we do, how we can be more effective. But when you're also dealing with a government with a big majority, that changes the dynamic. Now, it's not so you can still have a say, you can still have influence, but that changes the dynamic. But it's a very different parliament from the ones I was in previously when we had those knife-edge Brexit votes. Incidentally, I can remember getting police escorts simply to do an interview on College Green, which is, for those who aren't aware, just across the road from Parliament. So it is different, and obviously with Labour being in power rather than the Conservatives.
And Samantha Smith is here, journalist and commentator, and Dr. Peter Prinsley, Labour MP for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket. We'll hear a bit more from them on what they're up to in just a few moments' time. But let's go to a text question from Bobby in Grimsby. Why is the government only stopping convicted sex offenders from claiming asylum? Why not all criminals? Peter.
Yes, I can sympathise with that, actually. I mean, we've inherited an immigration system and an asylum system which was complete chaos. And what the government has been doing over the last 9 months or so is trying to bring order into chaos. And I'm actually very impressed with particularly the Home Secretary, who's got a grip on all of this stuff. I do understand that today there was an announcement about convicted sex offenders and asylum. That must be a vanishingly small number of people. Although I do understand that there was a notorious case in London of an asylum, somebody who'd been granted asylum who was a sex offender, who then went on to commit a terrible offence. But I think you always need to be a bit cautious about generalising from one event.
Are you not a bit queasy, though, that this announcement comes 2 days before the local elections? I mean, there's a tradition of sort of purdah during election campaigns. You just generally don't do this sort of thing as a government. Now, people point out, well, the Conservatives did it too, and that's absolutely correct.
Yes.
But last week there was this announcement on publishing the nationalities of foreign criminals in prisons in this country, and now this. And you think it's a bit desperate to try and claw back a few votes from Reform UK?
Well, look, as you know, Ian, I'm completely new to politics, and I have to...
No excuse.
I know it's no excuse. And I think what the Labour people have to do where they're trying to get elected is really to present their record of their achievements. And of course, these are local elections, and a lot of the Labour councils that are in action have really been effective. What I do understand about these elections is that these are actually largely Conservative county councils which are having elections. So it's really the Conservatives who are really fighting to present their record, and we're essentially the underdogs.
But are you not? We've only met once before on another programme that we were both on.
Yes.
And I thought, well, what a deeply honourable man this is. And I'm not trying to blow smoke up your whatever.
Because you only met me once.
Well, possibly that is true. Yeah. But, you must be a little bit queasy about this sort of 2 days before an election, surely.
To be honest, I hadn't thought about it until you've mentioned it just now. But I guess that's politics. Politics is not an entirely honourable occupation, as I've begun to observe.
Do you want to give us some other examples?
I couldn't possibly say.
Samantha Smith.
Well, I think the reality is, as was rightly said, we are in a local election cycle. That is the Conservatives to lose. Labour are pretty immune to significant losses in this. The areas that they're fighting in are not areas that they've traditionally won or are defending many seats in particular. But as someone who has done a great deal of activism and coverage on sex abuse, child sexual exploitation in particular, and the deportation or failed deportation of foreign sex criminals, I think that it does feel a little bit too little too late, and also the idea that only those who are declaring themselves as sex offenders, who are giving their real names, their passports, their details when they're claiming asylum, are going to be the ones who are stopped if they are registered sex offenders, is ignoring the fact that the majority of those that are offending in this country, who are waiting for asylum or processing claims that then go on to be arrested in these instances, are ones who either were not identified because they came in illegally via either migrant crossings or other means, or they had fake details, fake papers, or did not identify any sort of criminal background. It is a fallacy to suggest that this is going to stop a great deal of foreign criminals from coming onto our streets or indeed offending as they have offended before. And for those sexual offenders who are of foreign nationalities and were then convicted and prosecuted in Britain and are still on British streets because their deportations have indeed been blocked on ECHR grounds or other human rights grounds, again, far outweighs anything that I believe, in my opinion, could be achieved from this policy.
But the question, why not all criminals? I mean, it is a reasonable one, isn't it? Suella Braverman was on Tom Swarbrick's show earlier, and she said, well, surely anyone who commits a serious criminal offence in this country and they don't have a British passport, they forfeit their right to be here.
Absolutely. I am very hardline on this issue in that any individual who is not a British citizen, who does not have permanent residency or indeed has asylum but then commits a crime on British soil should have all rights and associated freedoms in Britain rescinded and should be deported back to their country of origin.
Arlene?
Well, I mean, I do agree with that, and I do think the reason why it's coming out this week is because there are elections, and I take Peter's point about the particular areas where these elections are taking place, but at the same time, Reform are coming after Labour seats, they're coming after Conservative seats, and I think that the Labour Party wants to look as if they're doing something tough in relation to immigration. I do believe that anyone that's convicted of and then you get into the area of what is a serious criminal offence, but anybody that is convicted of a serious criminal offence and who is a migrant should be deported. That is the absolute.
I would go further and say that anyone that commits any crime on British soil, if they're not a British citizen, should face deportation. If they are convicted of that crime, they are not following the laws.
What, like first shoplifting offence?
I don't believe
or driving offences.
I don't believe that anybody that is on British soil that is committing a crime, if they are not a British citizen, should have, and I say this is the daughter of a first-generation immigrant from a third world country, I don't believe that if you are here and you are disrespecting the rules of this nation, whatever it may be, if you're convicted of a crime, you should have your rights to remain in this country rescinded.
Stephen?
Yeah, just on this, I would have liked to see my government cracking down on sex offenders anyway, regardless of where they come from.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think Peter's right, there might be an element of tokenism. You can also bring another element into this, which is if you're an asylum seeker, let's call you a refugee is another word, there's a good chance you're fleeing a war or you're fleeing or you're fleeing a despotic regime. And it's more likely that you actually may have been the victim of a sexual crime because that's used as a weapon of war. So there are two sides to this, that those who are fleeing conflict, we saw the numbers from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq and elsewhere, there are two sides to this. And I think we need to have a better debate on migration. Migration is
hang on. How are there two sides? I don't get that.
Well, no, in the sense that
victim of a sexual crime.
Those who are asylum seekers may have been victims of these crimes as well.
But you're almost saying that's an excuse for them to commit a crime. No, it's no excuse.
I just said at the very start we should be cracking down on the perpetrators of these crimes regardless. And I would expect the government to be doing that. But I'd also like to see a different debate on refugees and asylum that recognises that some of them may also be victims.
There's no
where you have perpetrators, you also have victims as well. And I think the way in which we debate the migration issue and the refugee issue, which are two distinct issues, does sometimes, I'm sorry to see Labour falling into this, does lean into that reform agenda. And I think that's the wrong way to take these things on. Have a sensible debate about migration and how you manage that, and have a debate about the sensible ways to manage refugees as well.
I take your point, but there is absolutely unequivocally no two-tier on sexual abuse. I'm a survivor of child sexual exploitation and abuse from Telford. The crimes that were committed against me, the abuse that I survived, would give me no excuse nor rationale to commit crimes against another of a sexual nature. And I absolutely refute the idea that we should have a parallel debate for those who were previously victims and then go on to commit crimes in future. Yes, that can be a mitigating circumstance, but doesn't excuse the crime.
As a matter of fact, it is true that if you are a victim of a sexual abuse, you are more likely to be a perpetrator of it. So fair enough on that. But it's still
there is no excuse. I mean, and I didn't say there was any excuse. And I'm sorry about your own experiences, and you will speak with those experiences with some authority. I think that when we talk about these things, I want to see governments cracking down on sexual offences. I'd like to see that regardless, if it's asylum seekers or it's UK citizens, regardless of who it happens to be. But I talk more broadly about the refugee crisis, and the late Pope talked about this beautifully in terms of how we understand those who are fleeing. Now, that's nothing to do with perpetrators, it's understanding those who have maybe been victims, but no excuse for perpetrators, to be absolutely clear.
Right, lots more time for questions from you. 0345 6060 973. You can call or WhatsApp on that number or text 84850. It's 8:31. News headlines on LBC with Darryl Jackson.
The White House has accused Amazon of a hostile act over suggestions it was planning to list import taxes next to prices on its website. Donald Trump's imposed hefty duties on products from overseas, but the retailer says the idea was never a consideration for its main site. 3 people have been taken to hospital following a shooting in East London this afternoon. Emergency services were called to Forest Gate just before 3 o'clock. A performance by the rap group Kneecap at the Eden Project has been cancelled following criticism over their comments about Tory MPs. The Belfast-based band allegedly called on fans to kill their local politicians. LBC weather, only some rain in the far northern Isles this evening, otherwise a settled night and a low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC.
These apply.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:34 on LBC. It's Cross Question on Tuesday night. With us in the studio, Dr. Peter Prinsley, Labour MP for Bury St Edmonds and Stowmarket, and retired this month from a 4-decade-long career as an NHS surgeon. Hung up your stethoscope. How difficult a decision was that to make?
Well, I would say I hung up my scalpel, actually. I'm an ENT surgeon. Look, it was a bit difficult, frankly. It's a career that has been hugely satisfying, rewarding and enjoyable, and I had masses of colleagues. And my life as a surgeon in the hospital was really good fun. So I do miss it, and I miss the place and the people. But, I've moved on to something which was a bit of a surprise, and now I'm doing this instead, and I'm also enjoying this.
A lot of people would say, well, you'd do far more good to stay in the job as a surgeon than become a politician, a backbench politician with maybe not a huge amount of influence over events on a government with such a big majority.
Well, some people might say that. And
cynical people, obviously.
They might well say that. But I think that there is a place, actually, for people who are experienced doctors in Parliament. We had, I think, in the last Parliament, certainly in the Labour Party, only 1 doctor. Now we've got 5. And I do believe that as a group, we are beginning to influence things. The matter of the health department and the politics of the NHS is right at the top of everybody's political concerns. And I think having, a group of experienced doctors in Parliament can only be a good thing. One of my colleagues, Zubair Ahmed, who's a transplant surgeon from Scotland, is Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Health Secretary, Mr. Streeting. So we do have a little group, and we have, I think, fairly direct line of communication to the health department. So I think when I
love how you call him Mr. Streeting.
Yeah, when I was last, I think, on a panel with you, I can't remember whether it was with you, but I think we were discussing NHS England.
Yes.
And
you rather surprised me by saying, yep, all in favour of getting rid of it.
Well, I said something like, if NHS England didn't exist, would we have to invent it? And the very next day, it was abolished.
Yes.
So I sort of thought, well, maybe they are listening.
That's influence.
What's the big news tonight?
Samantha Smith, have you got ambitions to be a politician?
Oh, well, I was asked all the way back in 2024. I ran for local council against the now Labour Telford MP on an issue to do with child sexual exploitation and my experiences of it and the failings of local governments. But I'm a firm believer, and this might be a bit controversial for my age, but I don't think that anyone should step foot in the Commons under the age of 35, ideally under the age of 40. And I say as someone that has, worked 3 jobs since I was 16, homeless, have about as much life experience as a person could have by my age, I still think that there is a level of expertise and wisdom and I think understanding that you can only gain with age. And for me, I couldn't expect constituents at my age to trust that I understood their issues or could appropriately advocate for them if I've not gone through the sort of basic life stages that they have. And I think we see that every day unfolding in the House of Commons. I have a great deal of admiration for many of the young MPs who are in Parliament, but a lot of them, you can tell the difference in maturity and in their political output. Versus their slightly more experienced colleagues. So we'll wait and see, maybe in 50 years.
I'm a little surprised to hear you say that, because I would say that some of our most brilliant new MPs are our youngest MPs, actually. And I think they bring a perspective to Parliament, which is extremely valuable.
I think you need a mixture. You definitely need a mixture.
You need
because
a mixture.
You can't have everybody in their 60s and 70s being MPs, and you can't have everybody being in their 20s. You have to have a mixture of experience.
Absolutely.
And
to
I think
represent all of society.
The whole point of a parliament is it draws people from a wide range of backgrounds, ages, obviously from different parts of the United Kingdom, and that parliament comes from to parley to talk, and you want the
That's the voice of Stephen Gethins, and you heard Arlene Foster there. Let's go to our next question. It's from David in Cheltenham. Hello, David.
Hi, good evening. I'd just like to ask the panel, is Trump's attack on Canada, a Commonwealth country, actually an attack on the UK?
Oh, wow. Stephen?
I think that the way Mark Carney has dealt with Canada's sovereignty, its independence, its place in the world as an independent country has been quite something. And actually, I think we've got a lot to learn from Mark Carney and how you stand up to bullies, how you stand up on issues like Trump's tariffs and the way that Trump has talked about his next door neighbour, which has been one of disrespect. But, Mark Carney's got form on this. He was very good on Brexit, pointing out some of the devastating consequences of that. And I think he's taken exactly the right approach. And he's had a successful election result. But I don't think it's got anything to do with the United Kingdom. It's something for the people of Canada, and we should respect their independence and sovereignty. I think that's the lesson to learn from this.
I actually think that it's nothing to do with Mark Carney, and it's everything to do with Trump, that the Conservatives must be absolutely incandescent with rage with the way in which Trump has handled this election.
The Conservative leader's lost his seat.
I know.
But Carney was very straightforward to his credit.
It's absolutely, he played it straightforward. He didn't have much to do, frankly. The Conservatives have lost that election because of Trump. And if I was a Conservative leader, he's lost his seat as well. I mean, it's incredible. It just shows you the power of how things can turn on because they were going to win that election very clearly, win the election with a landslide, and now they've lost it. How devastating is that for them?
But the interesting thing is,
they can do nothing about it.
The Liberals did not win a majority. They were very close to it. 168 seats, they needed 172. But the Conservatives have still polled 144. And given the Trump factor, that actually, I think, is quite surprising that they managed to get that many.
Yeah, but think what they would have got if Trump hadn't interfered in the election.
Absolutely.
It is, and you saw that upsurge of Canadian patriotism. But actually, I have to say, I think Mark Carney has done well. I think that's straightforward, talking about it. We talked about reform earlier on. I wish we'd take them on their arguments, and I think Mark Carney has done that and done that very effectively. You're right, the Conservatives probably did better than expected in the latter days, but we're still talking about a Liberal government going into its 4th term that was written off just a few weeks ago. Absolutely written off.
Was, yeah.
Samantha?
I think that I have a great deal of family in Canada, so to see how the tides have turned against and then back towards the Liberal Party in the last few months is really quite incredible to have witnessed. To go from what was previously branded the most useless and pointless election in modern Canadian history, where I think there was an overall seat change of 2, to this that was held on by the skin of the teeth by the Liberals when they were in the jaws of almost unprecedented defeat after Trudeau bowed out. I think that you're absolutely right that this was the Conservatives' election to lose, but they are not coming in as a popular party. They are coming in rather how the Labour Party have come into this government on the back of another party's loss, and for them to transform that into a mandate of any sort where they can feel trusted and seen and understood by the Canadian people again is going to be a very, very difficult task because people won't have forgotten what the Liberal Party did in the past 5 to 10 years that turned them against them in the first place. So they're going to have to make some big changes and very quickly to be able to brush over the history like that.
Peter?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on Canadian politics, which won't surprise you, but what I would say is that Mr. Trump is the most incredibly consequential individual. I mean, he's absolutely remaking the world order. And so I'm not surprised that the election in Canada went as it did. Look,
but what would be in his head to send the tweet out that he did on polling day to urge Canadians to vote for the Conservative Party when he must know, or his advisors must know, that any intervention like that would be completely counterproductive?
Well, I think that he what Trump does is what Trump wants to do. I'm not sure that he listens to anybody very much. He just does the first thing that comes into his head. But what I would say is that I think that in respect of our situation in this country, is that I think the relationships between the peoples of the United Kingdom and the peoples of North America and the United States are very enduring. We have a common language, a common heritage, and I think that this sort of idea, I mean, I remember people talking about here today, gone tomorrow politicians. I mean, Trump is not going to be gone tomorrow, but he won't be here forever. And I think that the relationships between the people of these islands and of North America are very enduring.
Someone's texted in to say, your panellist who thinks that this has nothing to do with Britain should speak to a few Canadians who are very upset by Britain's silence on the issue, by all accounts. I think it means you, Stephen.
Oh, is that? Well, I think the point I was making is this is an issue for the people of Canada. There are links, strong Scots diaspora, there's a strong Scots-Irish diaspora, and also
absolutely.
Scots diaspora in Canada and in the United States. But I think where Mark Carney's been quite right is he set out Canada makes the decisions about the people of Canada, and he's been very clear on that. And I thought that was an argument, and yes, Donald Trump probably did help him, and I think Arlene's point on that is fair. But we respect our neighbours and we respect territorial integrity. And Trump's trying to knock down those norms, and we've seen it in Greenland as well. And I actually would have liked to have seen Keir Starmer be a little bit stronger in all of this.
I think that Canada is in quite a unique position, though, in that, as far as it goes, they have a great deal of Commonwealth pride and Commonwealth identity in a way that many of the other Commonwealth nations are not necessarily quite as vocal on. I think that obviously they are a sovereign nation and should be and have been respected as such by the United Kingdom for a very long time. But the strength of that bond and the level to which British and Canadian issues affect each other, I think that Canadian society always traditionally looked to Britain as a barometer on many political and social issues, and for Canada to have endured such a long-standing relationship with Britain to be silent or treat the issue as though it is separate from them due to their own sovereignty is to ignore the level of entrenchment that British society has in Canada.
Well, Lauren says Carney is showing Labour up for it really badly. I think it's too early to say that because maybe in 3 or 4 years' time we can judge whether Starmer's approach is better than the one that Carney's had. But I mean, look, he's a non-politician who has shaken up Canadian politics, and it'll be interesting to see whether he can govern in the same way. Right, more questions from you in just a few moments' time with our panel. You're listening to LBC. It's 8:45.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:48 on LBC. Arlene Foster, Peter Prinsley, Stephen Gethins and Samantha Smith here with me answering your questions. The next one comes from Tyler in Leeds. Hey up, Tyler.
Hey, Mr. Dale, how are you doing?
Beat you to it, didn't I? Tyler always says...
You're getting ahead of me. You're getting ahead of me these days. So my question to the panel is, what's their opinion on photo ID? Should we get rid of photo ID? Because some people are for it, some people are against it, but I think there's some studies that shown it reduces voter turnout. So I personally think it's a little bit anti-democratic, but what does the panel think? I'd love to hear the thoughts.
Well, let's turn to the member who has most experience of it, because it's I don't know when it first came in Northern Ireland, but does it decrease turnout?
No, it absolutely does not decrease turnout. We've had some of the highest turnouts in general elections than anywhere else in the United Kingdom, so it doesn't reduce turnout, and actually it is really good to get people to come forward, get their ID and go and vote. I mean, I was sitting listening to a debate on this in the House of Lords, and I could not understand for the life of me why people were opposed to voter ID. It has made a huge difference to battling fraud in Northern Ireland, and fraud was a real issue for us in Northern Ireland during elections. People would turn up in a different hat or whatever and come in to vote again. So it has stopped all of that. I am fundamentally in favour of voter ID.
You won't be surprised here. I fundamentally disagree with Arlene. It's not fair for me to comment on what happened in Northern Ireland, but my experiences were chapping around certainly some of the areas where people didn't have a passport, didn't have photo ID, and it wasn't picked up on because they just weren't going to the polling station. And the Electoral Commission's picked up on this as well, that there was a depression in turnout because of the fact that people don't all have voter ID. Not everybody's got a passport. And when I was chapping doors, people were thinking, I don't have photo ID, and they weren't able to get the other ID in time. So I found it first-hand chapping on doors that there were people not voting as a direct consequence of this legislation coming in. And I'm sorry about that, because we must do everything we all possibly can to make sure as many people as possible are voting.
Yeah, but there's a way to deal with that. There's a way to deal with that, to get out and get people their voter ID, which is what we do in Northern Ireland. And, you have to get them registered, first of all, then you have to get them their voter ID, and that's what we do in Northern Ireland, and I can't see why you couldn't do that in Scotland.
We chap, especially in Dundee, we're renowned for it, chapping, and in Angus, tens of thousands of doors. We do it all the year round.
What is that?
Door knocking.
All right.
Door knocking. Canvassing. Door. Is it door chapping? Oh, quite sorry. I'll translate it. But look, we encourage it. That has to be for people to do, but we definitely saw it. The Electoral Commission picked up on this as well. And I'm not sure, and again, I'm not going to comment on Northern Ireland, but I'm not sure about the problem it was tackling. I'm not sure we had the same problem in Scotland. I don't think we really had any prosecutions under the sort of voter ID legislation.
But you see, this is the argument that people on that side there are going, oh, there aren't many prosecutions. Yeah. No, there aren't many prosecutions because it's very difficult to prove. That's why. I remember from my days in active politics, on polling day, sitting in the party office, getting call after call after call from people saying, well, I can't vote because they say somebody's voted in my name.
Yeah. Well, look, I remember I was knocking doors, okay? And people would say to me, I'm not going to go. What happens when people don't go to... Because they don't want the humiliation of turning up at a polling station to be turned away. And if people go through that, they don't get picked up in the stats. And it's interesting that the Electoral Commission did a bit of work around this, and they were finding out that... And in particular was people that didn't have passports, didn't have photo ID on a day-to-day basis. But we did find that people were being disenfranchised by this legislation. And I'm not sure why it was introduced.
Samantha.
I ran for local council in my hometown of Telford, and local council elections obviously traditionally have a very low voter turnout anyway, but I asked, it was actually the first round of elections after voter ID was introduced on a local level, and I asked many people whether they had any trouble, whether they knew anybody, just because I was curious, who weren't going to come and vote because they didn't have photo ID. And indeed, people showed up having forgotten their ID, and it wasn't a thing of, oh, I'm so deeply embarrassed I'm not going to come back. It was, oh, let me pop home and grab my driver's license or whatever. And if they didn't, there can be letters that are sent out by local councils, there can be initiatives sent out to say you can get your free voter ID at this link. If you need someone to help, we can help you. This is what local councils and local infrastructure is here for, to help to enfranchise people. And so, yes, obviously there's a learning curve and a time for implementation when making this the new normal will take time. But I don't agree that it's disenfranchising people on a level.
So 2 things. First of all, I think this was a rule that was brought in to solve a problem which didn't really exist. I don't think I don't know in East Anglia that there was evidence of widespread voter fraud. First thing. Second thing is that many people now are postal voters. I think more than half the voters in some of the districts are postal voters. That's, of course, a way of getting around this turning up with a voter ID. But secondly, I'd just like to say something about ID in general. And I think we will move into a world where everybody has a digital ID. I think this will probably follow from their health record, which will make this very acceptable to people. So people will be able to access their health record through a digital portal, and this will eventually become, I think, digital ID for the citizens, and this will really change the way in which we access many public services, including the voting system.
I've changed GP recently because my GP in London retired, so I've gone to a GP near where I live in Kent, which I probably should have done years ago. And I was astonished to find that my medical records are not transferred automatically to my new GP. They go to the local health authority, who, when they can be bothered, then might send it on. I mean, it's utterly preposterous.
That's better than mine. Mine were held in paper files still in Telford that had to be scanned and faxed over to Durham.
So, I mean, our idea, I think, is eventually to give the patient ownership of the medical record through their own digital access system. And I think if we can digitise the public services, it will actually transform Britain.
I do want to get on to the final question here, because it's quite an important one from Marita, who says, what should the UK government do to get humanitarian aid moving back into Gaza after a 7-week blockade? Now, the UN World Food Programme warned on Friday that its food supplies in Gaza will run out very soon, possibly even this week, after Israel cut off aid at the start of March. Israel's government insists it is complying with international law and there is no aid shortage. Well, if no aid is going in, Stephen Gethins, how can there not be a shortage?
And also, if there's no aid's going in, how can they not be breaking international law? I believe in the international rules-based system. I think it makes us all safer. I think we should be cracking down on President Putin and others, but I also think if there are violations of international law by those the UK considers its allies, that should not matter. There are tens of thousands of lives that have been put at risk, including a lot of children. I would want to see, again, the Labour government take a much stronger line than it does. It's not just about Israel-Palestine, it's about the international rules-based system.
Peter?
Well, look, this was discussed in Parliament today, actually. I was sitting in a long debate all about exactly this, and there were questions asked about what could be done to try and get more aid into the war zones. I mean, there was discussion about whether we could deliver aid by sea and whether we could do airdrops that would work. But in fact, the truth of the matter is that only large-scale road transport is likely to be effective, and these are the trucks which are waiting outside the Gaza Strip, waiting to get in. What actually needs to happen is that peace needs to break out, and for peace to break out, what needs to happen is the hostages need to be released. The hostages have been locked up for more than 500 days. There are still 59 of them. Release the hostages, and the fighting will stop. Once the fighting stops, we can get the aid in. I mean, it seems very obvious to me, but of course I'm sitting in a peaceful radio studio in London. But that is what I would like to happen.
Arlene?
I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, I do think that we need not be blind as well to the control which Hamas has in Gaza, and the fact that a lot of the aid is not actually getting to the people who, Stephen, we want it to get to. Of course, we want the aid
Israel
to get.
Has stopped. The UN said that as well.
UNRWA is no. I mean, we have heard a lot of very bad reports around UNRWA, and in terms, well, there has been many pieces of evidence given in relation to UNRWA, in particular. UNRWA really needs to be taken out. Yes, that's absolutely right.
Depriving them of food and drink
Stephen.
and under siege is a breach of international law.
Yes, and so is what's happening with UNRWA, and I think they need to be taken out of the equation.
And
we need to absolutely get away in for the aid. I want to see aid getting into Gaza as well, but we cannot avoid talking about the control that Hamas has in Gaza in relation to the aid. They are controlling a lot of the aid when it gets there, and it's not actually getting to the people that it needs to get to.
Samantha.
It isn't as simple as get aid in, everything will be better. As Arlene said, we cannot ignore the control that Hamas has when the aid gets in. It isn't as simple as Israel bad and Palestine good. It is far too complicated to simply solve by letting the trucks in and expecting it all to solve itself.
Stopping the trucks in, stopping food and water, and we know that is a breach of international law. That side of it is straightforward. We should uphold international rules-based system. Our security relies on it.
The problem is Hamas does not uphold any sort of rules-based system. They are terrorists,
and therefore,
and
nobody said anything different. Nobody said anything different, but that's why we must obtain to the rules-based system.
Right, final fun question from Ryan in Chester. After his great success in campaigning for Canada's Conservatives yesterday, what else outside of politics would you like to see Donald Trump take his Midas touch to and absolutely torch the chances of next? Samantha.
Oh, I'm a big sports fan, and I've been particularly lined on the tennis at the moment. Emma Raducanu hasn't had a major title win for a couple of years now, so I'd say if he could support whoever Emma Raducanu is going against at whatever time, I'd be very grateful. It's time to bring British tennis back.
Peter.
You know, I was going to go for a sports analogy as well. I think it's high time that he was put in charge of a Premier League football club.
Anyone in particular?
And let's just see what were to happen. Well, you know, I think Manchester United's had a rough time, hasn't it, in recent years? And it would be interesting to see what Trump would do with that.
Well, of course...
so you want him to nail them to the ground?
A lot of Manchester United supporters probably live in your constituency, so I'm not sure you've endeared yourself to them with that. Stephen?
So, because he's already come out against Scottish independence and the UK rejoining the EU, I'm going to go for Eurovision. I hope he campaigns against Scotland having its own Eurovision entry.
Is that a prospect?
I'd love to see it on the cards. So Donald Trump could put it on the table for us in the same way that he put a Liberal victory back on the table in Canada.
Arlene.
Well, I believe there's a vacancy now with Kneecap because they've lost an agent. So I think he could be a really good agent for Kneecap.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, hold that thought, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming in tonight. On tomorrow's panel, we have the Labour MP Preet Kaur Gill, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Greg Hands, the Labour activist and former Gogglebox star Josh Tapper, and the journalist and political consultant Dr. Tim Hames. In the next hour, we are going to turn our attention to, yes, you've guessed it, Donald Trump, because today, or is it tomorrow? People are saying, well, it's today and tomorrow. I don't see how it can be, but there we are. He celebrates his first 100 days in office in his second term. So it's a very simple question I've got for you over the next hour. Have his first 100 days been a triumph or a tragedy? I want to compile a list of his achievements in his first 100 days and a list of his errors. I've got plenty of pieces of paper, 0345 6060 973, because there is a tendency to believe that it's all one-way traffic and that it's been an absolute disaster. But there will be many of you listening who might want to take issue with that.
On your radio, on Global Player, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Amazon has denied claims it planned to include the cost of US tariffs in the price tag of products on its main website. The Trump administration has described those plans as a hostile act. Well, LBC's Washington correspondent Tony Waterman has the details.
Amazon, in a statement, admitted that it was something